were talking about like a Venn diagram of joint ventures. Can you talk to what that actually means?
Yeah, I was gonna do up a nice fancy sort of I mean, you could just do a Google search on a Venn diagram, but
Use Canva.
yeah, I did use Canva, but I realized if I tried to do, would have spent hours on making it pretty.
Okay.
But the Venn diagram of joint venture, so I think it's quite an appropriate visual. So you have the money, you have the money partner, the borrowing capacity, and then you have the skills and the knowledge sort of partner. So they're the three sort of aspects. So it's very rare that somebody will have all three of those. So it's very rare that somebody has the skills, the knowledge, the money, and also the borrowing capacity. So usually, imagine that it meets in the middle where there's somebody who has sort of a one or two of those skills, and they can then sort of combine with somebody and marry up with that skill set. So the purpose, I suppose, or a goal of a joint venture is to uncover the resource that you don't have. So whether that be money, or whether that be time, or whether that be borrowing capacity, or whether that be knowledge. So that's kind of
so three components that look in. And how do we think about the split with those?
In terms of who gets what?
Yeah, who gets what? Like who? Because one of the things as well to think about is like one of the things that I think about is like a buyer's agent, right? You can pay a buyer's agent a fixed price fee to go ahead and find you a property, or you don't lose that money. You don't use that money as an upfront expense. You don't use that. But when you use somebody to find and do the deal for you, they will get a percentage of the deal. So you might use $15,000 for a buyer's agent to go find you that deal. But then if you integrate with them and they find the deal and run the project, they may make $60,000, $100,000 on, depending on the deal. So how do you think about splitting up the revenue of, because let's just say we have those three parties. We have the money partner, the borrowing partner, and then the finding and doing the deal partner.
Yeah. So there's and we've had sort of three or four people have done joint ventures. So Adam, so there's two, Adam Barry, a couple of weeks ago we had him. So there's, I suppose, two different ways you can think about doing this, and I've done it the way where you've allocated out a split. So you can either sort of say that that you sort of split it up and say I get X percentage, and then the other person gets the other X percentage, or the other two parties, however it is. So typically, the person putting in the money, I mean, if you want to do it really simply, you could split up 25% for each component. So the four components are time. So who's actually sort of the knowledge is another component. So you could say, I mean, that can be, I suppose, 50%, and then you have the money partner, and then you have the borrowing capacity partner. So if you wanted to do it really simply, you could have the four parts, 25% each.
So however, what's time? Because I thought it was finding and doing the deal. You're now splitting that up to finding the deal and then running the project. So we have a project manager, finding the project, running the project, cash, and borrowing capacity.
Yeah, often it's the same person. I mean, often they may get somebody who's less experienced to then sort of, or you may get somebody who's sort of really keen, enthusiastic to do a lot of the grunt work, as in call the 15 agents they need to find the deal, or call the people who have sites that are looking to potentially sell. So, because the person who has the knowledge, it's not necessarily in their best interest to be doing all that grunt work, because otherwise, how can they do sort of 5 or 10 deals if they're doing all that? They may have somebody who's, it's like a real estate agent, right? You have the senior selling person, you have the junior sales agent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's one way to think about splitting up the revenue. So let's say that you split the deal. We do 33, 33, 33 if you're finding and getting the deal. Yep. But then what's the other way of managing?
So the other way is where you can offer a fixed percentage to the investor, to the money partner. And with that way, if you offer a fixed percentage, then that way the person who's running the deal, or the knowledge partner, I would say they're likely taking on more risk, because they're actually then sort of saying whether the deal makes money or not, which of course in most cases it does. They still have to find a way to make sure that person gets, well, they should make a way to make sure that person gets paid their percentage of the deal.
Perfect. Does it actually make sense for a buy, renovate, and hold strategy for what you've kind of done?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to this, let's go back to our example in Newcastle,
Jump it
and
up.
we'll sort of let's go back to it, and I'll show you. Does it make? I mean, and of course we've had an absolute bull market in property, so let's not pretend that this is always going to do this. But you've essentially bought this property at 303,000 back in, that's 6 years ago. Let's call it 6.5 because 6 years ago. Yes, you have done. So you put 50K in it. So you're in for, what's that? Let's throw some stamp duty in there. So you're in for about 370. And now an estimated value of 647. So that's what, 85%. So you've close to doubled your money in 6 years. So I don't know if that sort of, and I suppose where it doesn't stack up is if you're buying and holding, the challenge is that when you go to buy your next property, it can be hard to get money out of that particular deal, because you need to be able to, both parties need to be able to show serviceability.
Yeah,
to be able to,
but also someone has, you're the borrowing capacity partner. You're not the cash partner. So you've put in nothing, and the cash partner's put in $100,000 or $200,000. They can do something. What is the best utilization of that capital, and how can you assign it to something else? It's better for them, rather than, yes, they can hold it in 6 years and they may get it to 600,000. It may not be the best way to go. So generally speaking, what we see is in joint ventures, people don't buy, renovate, and hold because there's too many conflicting options, right? Like you've made money, you've got money, the borrowing capacity hasn't got as much invested, so
yeah.
the incentives are not aligned. So
Well, and life changes. Like sometimes somebody will need that extra cash, or need to go on if they want to buy their dream home. So I think it's sort of, it does get a bit more challenging the longer the joint venture goes.
What are some of the important components of a JV? We've covered it off a little bit, but it would be great to kind of go through some of your top tips of key components for a JV.
So when we say components, do you mean which? When you say
5 must-haves of a JV agreement.
Okay, cool. I've got that. Here's some I prepared earlier. So I've got some. You've got to have an exit strategy. So I mean, this is I don't think I had this as a question. It's just hundreds of questions you can ask. So an exit strategy is essentially, an exit strategy is, as the name sounds, like what is the plan to sort of sell the property, or what is the end game of the deal? Are you going to sort of get the development application in place and then sell it with the DA? Are you going to build the properties? Are you going to renovate and hold for 2 years? Are you going to sort of renovate and hold for 10 years? Like there's so many different ways you can, but just, it's clear to have multiple, it's great to have, you got to have multiple exit strategies as well. Because yes, we're going to build free properties, but what happens if you can't get the finance for that? What are you going to do then? Do you then sort of get the DA in place and then sell with the DA? And what's the consequence of doing that? Are you still going to be able to are you going to be able to break even at the very least? And if you can't do that, then there's a bit of there's a bit too much risk in that deal for my liking.
What if? That's the question. What if this? What if that? What if? And if the person hasn't got a good answer for you, maybe they haven't done the research that they need to do.
Yeah. The other one, what happens in the event of someone being able to or needing to exit the deal? So let's just say some of these deals could run 5, 6, 7 years. Like what happens if somebody sort of, touch wood, ends up in a health situation where particularly the person running the deal, what happens then? Who takes charge? Because then it's potential that somebody could have power of attorney. So what happens? And it's important you probably write that in the joint venture agreement, sort of in the event. I know it's very morbid to think that, but if it were to happen, how does it sort of get
What happens
resolved?
to the deal? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who is responsible for each task? So I think this is very important, because if you're not clear on this, and if it's not sort of documented, then you can end up sort of stepping on each other's toes. Because if
Hmm.
you're a money partner, and if you want to go and pick the color of tiles, then I think it's just clear that the person, you sort of understand what you can sort of have a say in, and what's going to be the domain of the person running the deal. I think that's
Yeah,
important.
and I think this is an overlooked thing. Like, I'm the expert in finding, negotiating, securing, and running the projects. I am going, like, there needs to be a leader of the project, and you can't have the money partner, the deal finder, the borrowing capacity partner all chipping in. Just, you need to hand over control to that person, and that's why it's so important to trust them. But I think it's very important to have those clear roles, because you must see that, Jeff, where someone's not so clear and they put their hand up and it's like, no, I don't agree with this decision because it's not the best, but it may be. And you're just
Yeah.
silly.
The role of communication in these things is completely underrated, and just kind of actually it's knowing as the person running the deal, it's about the way you communicate that. Because if you may sort of be correct, but if you sort of come up and say, well, no, you're wrong, we're going to do it this way, that's potentially going to ruffle some feathers, which sometimes you might have to ruffle feathers, but if you can avoid that, then that's hopefully best for the harmony of the relationship. um, yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
the next one is, what happens if the strategy needs to be changed, which I think sort of pays of an exit strategy, and how will any disputes be resolved, which I sort of talk to that, because I think ultimately, if you can resolve it without going to a formal resolution, or formal sort of legal proceedings, I think that's the best for everyone. If you can't, then that's, but at least have sort of a couple of clear sort of steps in play. Maybe even have an impartial third party who can sort of say, well, step in and sort of look to somebody who has a bit of knowledge and understanding, and sort of says, well, but doesn't have a vested interest in the project.
So what happens? How do you do that? What are some of the questions to consider or
Yep.
ask someone who's presenting the deal, right? So someone's saying, hey, I need someone with cash, I need someone with borrowing ability because I'm a buyer and a transactor and I can buy and develop this deal.
Yep. So yeah, if you're the one looking to potentially invest, and even if you're looking to reach out to money partners or borrowing capacity, I think both these questions are useful for both sides of the transaction, or both sides of the relationship. So I'm just going to speak. I've got about 100 of them, but I think I've got 10 here that I mentioned. So what is, well, yeah,
Yes.
what is your track record, and how many of this deal have you done? I think that's probably one of the key ones,
Yeah.
because
PTR, we call that proven track
proven
record.
track record. That's a JJB one. I think that's
Yep.
I don't know whether he coined it, but yeah,
It is. He
he's
did.
pretty well known for that. So I think if it's somebody's first deal and they're looking for money, I would sort of want to say, well, you have to give me a higher return. Like it's consummate to, well, how are they actually executing that deal? If they've done 10 of them and they've sort of landed 8 successfully, and there was one in the middle that they didn't quite nail, you can sort of maybe still consider that person, and sort of say, because if anybody said, oh, they've always nailed every deal they've done, everything's went perfect, that to me is a bit of a red flag. Because anybody who's perfect, it sort of means they haven't done enough deals, or they're potentially hiding something.
Yeah. And how do you uncover that kind of stuff though? Like, what are some of the questions I can ask to get through that
Yeah,
bullshit?
I'd even ask. Well, I mean, it's no guarantee you're going to be able to see through all the bullshit, but the question I would say is, what mistakes or errors have you made? And if they say none,
Mm.
if it's like, okay, well, what do you mean you haven't made any mistakes or errors? Like, I don't, like, surely that, like, even in any deal that I've done, that even the most recent done where we made money, we made probably 2 or 3 not vitally critical errors, but just sort of minor ones around financing, where we could have sort of sped up the process and saved on maybe $4,000 or $5,000 of interest. So just something like that, an example that they can actually demonstrate that they've sort of thought about that, rather than just saying, well, no, I'm perfect, I never make a mistake. It's like when you go to a job interview and somebody asks you, well, what's your weaknesses? Like, oh, my weakness is I work too hard. It's like, well, I don't know. It's just a cringy response. It's like, oh, I do too many deals. Like, well, okay, well, maybe that's a mistake. So I don't know if that helps, but
What else? What else? What's another question? Throw some questions at me.
I'm
I want to
going to
ask
do quick
this
fire. So
development
amount of
parter.
return and security on offer. That's an important one, but we could unpack that. But let's nail for the show. So what happens if and when things don't go according to plan? And this a lot of these questions will form part of the joint venture agreement as well, the heads of agreement they call. Another question is what happens if one party wants to exit the deal and the other doesn't? Like what happens then? Who puts in additional capital if required? So if for example there's a delay in the build costs go up or anything like that, who's responsible for putting that extra capital? How active a role can I play? So if you want to learn along the way, and sort of if you want to, what sort of details are you going to get? Are you going to just get an email once a month, or can you sort of carry along for site inspections or all that sort of stuff? How much contingency is in the numbers? So the feasibility, like when you say contingency, like have they built in 5%, so that if things go wrong, if you're only on a 15% profit on cost, and next minute there's I don't know, build costs increase, then how can you let's see, what evidence and research and assumptions underpin your numbers as well? Like what sort of, how do they understand, how are they getting to that 200K profit from that deal?
These are amazing questions, Jeff. Can you talk to the legal security that's put in place when doing these deals? Because how do you protect yourself? How do you protect your money? And then how do you protect your borrowing capacity? Now, when we talk about borrowing capacity, we mean that someone might work in a PAYG job, right? They work 9 to 5 in an office. They make $120,000, but they're very busy and they don't have time to run a project. Someone who doesn't have they run their business that runs projects like this, or they're a buyer's agent and a project management, they find and run development deals. They do the deal. And then you've got someone with cash. That's just, think about a small business, right? If you start a small business in Australia, you generally can't borrow for 2 years. You can't borrow to buy property, but you may have a cash flow. You may have a business that's spitting off cash flow. So you've got all this cash flow, but you've got no way to borrow money. So you get together with these 3 people and create a little thing. So anyway, sorry, that there was a question about borrowing capacity. That's how that works. But yeah, can you talk to the legal security that's put in place on doing these deals?
So first, I'll talk to some experience from some of the stuff this is only my experience. So you have to speak to your solicitor. And if people are really interested in learning about this, we should get Steve's solicitor guy on, Lewis O'Brien. I don't know how to actually reach out to Lewis, but yeah, he's actually really, like, he's done this for over 20 years. So but legal security. So in terms of, if you're the money partner, I've not been the money partner. I've been the borrowing capacity partner in both in the joint venture deals that I've done. So the questions that I would be asking, because I've sort of seen, is I would want to sort of see, because the bank is going to have first. The bank's going to have first title. Lewis is my lawyer. Yeah. He's very well known in the industry. Lewis O'Brien. So they're going to have first mortgage, the bank or the person lending the majority of the cash, unless you're borrowing it all from it.
If everything goes sour, the bank gets paid.
Yeah. Yep. So then you can. So then comes down to, well, how much are you actually putting? If you're putting 30% into the deal, then the other major lender lends 70%. And then I suppose there's also the costs, also the renovation, the subdivision costs. The challenge you'll have is, yes, you can put a second mortgage or put a caveat on it, but the problem is, if the deal really goes south, as in if it goes incorrect, if it goes sort of belly up, if it goes like the Titanic, imagine it sinking, hit the iceberg, then they may not be. The bank will sell it just to recoup their costs, so they're not necessarily concerned about you as a second mortgagee. So that's a challenge. So then another way, you can put caveats on it, and I'm trying to remember who somebody spoke to it. last week. They said the problem with COVID is all it'll do is stop them from selling the property. Or actually, it may not even necessarily stop them from selling the property. It'll just mean that the person who then sort of, if somebody else decides to buy the property, the caveat will still be on it. So, I mean, and that may make it harder for them to sell the property. So, caveats is one option, but I
Can you have a second mortgage over a property? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, second mortgage, but if the bank's taking 80%, then they're gonna sell it for, let's just say the property is valued at 500K, and they have a 400K mortgage on it. They're gonna sell it for 420 or 430. And then, so you might get paid a little bit back, but then there's going to be legal costs. So it is a risk. There is.
And that's actually a point that I wanted to raise around this is, if you want no risk, put your money in a term deposit and you'll get that return for whatever the term deposit, not financial advice, obviously, but with doing, an investment, if you're getting 8% yield or 50% yield or 300% return on your cash, like Jef has done in this deal, there's going to be risks associated. So you do want to minimize the risk as much as you can by having as much security as you can.
So the way you can do that, Joe, what I was getting to is, I was talking about a long way, is with the person, if they have other properties, you may be able to sort of say, okay, if you're really backing yourself in this deal, I want to put myself on a mortgage with an interest in another property that person owns, because then, and of course you have to understand how much LVR, what sort of loan is on that property, because if there's a 90% mortgage on that property, that's still worthless, because if that property gets sold, you're not going to get anything. Or you could even sort of say, I mean, so there's ways that you can sort of understand their asset position if you really want to go to that depth. So then comes down to ultimately how much trust you have in that relationship, and how much that joint venture partner is willing to give up, and how much they back themselves, I suppose.
Yeah.